Welcome. Okay, so today we're studying Psalm 54 and maybe also Psalm 55 because 54 is relatively short. Um, okay, so in the introduction to the Blue Edition, there's a one sentence introduction. So I'll read the introduction for both Psalms 54 and 55. Pursued by foes, one must pray for God's salvation. And then in 55, despite the revolt of his son Absalom from the defection of his and the defection of an intimate friend and advisor Achitophel, David was unwavering in his faith that God would enable him to prevail. So we're in a series of psalms starting from Psalm 52. First, it talked about Doeg, and then it talked about um, and then in 53, it discussed uh, so it continued on with the discussion of Doeg and the Ziphites. So basically, it's talking about just the and here in 54, it's the one especially for the Ziphites, the psalm especially about the Ziphites. So Doeg was the leader of the Sanhedrin in the time of King Saul, and he perverted the Torah law basically for the sake of impressing the king for political reasons, and it led him eventually to commit the genocide of the priestly city of Nov. Okay, so but before that happened, David didn't really know Doeg on a personal level. Worse than that is what happened in this psalm, as far as David's personal emotional state. The Ziphites were actually his cousins in the tribe of Judah, and instead of accepting David as the leader of Judah, would later on he would become the king in Hebron. So, but the Ziphites separated themselves from the rest of the tribe of Judah and took the side of Saul for the sake of trying to eliminate David. So, in the case of Doeg, he actually slandered the priestly the city of Nov, the village, and then he personally took out a sword and led the violence against it. Here, they did not actively try to chase down David with a sword, but they were his cousins, and they slandered him with the same intention to kill as Doeg had. And then in Psalm 55, which I expect us to get to tonight, we're going to discuss about Achitophel. He was the leader of Sanhedrin in David's reign, and he also uh, became evil, and he took the side of David's son Absalom to start a rebellion. And that was even more painful than the Ziphites, because um, Achitophel was also a personal mentor of King David in a couple of ways, and he influenced David's son to try to slay him. Absalom may never have intended to kill David if not for Achitophel's advice. So we're going in ascending emotional uh, ordeals of David. First, Doeg, it was an emotional ordeal because Doeg's slander led to those who were benefactors to David being killed, and then here it's extremely painful because it's his cousins who are turning against David and the rest of Judah to try to make political closeness to King Saul. And then Psalm 55, Achitophel, he from his close advisor to becoming perhaps the one who made Absalom turn over a leaf for evil. So, in other words, potentially the perverter of his son is Achitophel. So, therefore, Achitophel is considered the worst of his enemies. But we see that Doeg may have caused the most bloodshed. So now the Zifim, in here in 54, the Zifim, it's a short psalm because their threat did not really actualize. They just removed the I mean, it feels horrible to know that a relative betrayed someone. So the Ziphites were tale bearing on David to get him in mortal danger. So it was just a horrible feeling, but it was not the worst of his suffering. It's they, who suffered more than David. It's amazing how much he endured, and instead of becoming bitter, he became grateful and created very incredible praises of God in this book of Psalms. Okay, so here I'm going to read the Hebrew, and then we'll have a translator. Lamnatzech maskil leDavid, binaginos maskil leDavid. B'vo hazifim vayomeru l'Shaul, halo David mistater imanu. Elhim b'shimcha hoshieni uvigvurasacha sedineni. Elhim shemat filasi hazina limrei fi. Ki zorim kamu alai va'aritzim bikshu nafshi v'lo samu Elohim l'negdam salah. Hine Elohim ozerli anai b'somchei nafshi. Yashiv hara lo shoroi va'amitecha hatzmisem. Binadava ezbecha lach odeshimcha Adonai kitov. Ki mikoltsara hitzilani voyvaira sa'ini. Okay, so Mary, would you please translate Psalm 54?
Yes. For the conductor within the Genos, a maskil by David. When the Ziphites came and said to Saul, "Is not David in hiding among us? O God, by your name, save me, and by your might, vindicate me. O God, hear my prayer. Give ear to the utterance of my mouth. For strangers have risen up against me, and oppressors have sought my soul. They have not set God before themselves, Salah. Behold, God is my helper. The Lord is with the supporters of my soul. May he repay the evil to my watchful enemies. In your truth, cut them down. With a free will offering, I will sacrifice to you. I will thank your name, Hashem, for it is good. For from every distress he has rescued me, and upon my foes my eye has looked.
So just I wanted to do a comparative study with another psalm about translating one of the verses. But before we do, I just wanted to point out it's amazing, and of course later on in Psalms, David is going to say the phrase "kitov" because God is good later on. But here we see he already says it here in Psalm 54. And remember, that's the way God described creation, right? So God saw the potential of everything he created, and then he would say, and it was good, right? So therefore, so in other words, David is describing something that could be horrible, but he's trying to focus people in on the idea that for it is good. In other words, don't judge God unfavorably just because he's testing me in a way that most people are not tested. You understand? So David is defending God's honor from people who might misjudge God. Now, even though King David didn't suffer from this from any sin of his own, so David is justifying God's justice, even though he didn't do anything wrong. You understand? So I just think it's very sweet at this point. Uh, David is kind of like preceding potential criticisms against, God forbid, uh, heaven, and he just cuts it off. He doesn't say it's not an option. It's not an option to judge God unfavorably. Okay, so now the verse in that was verse 5 and 54, Psalm 54 is similar to a verse in Psalm 86. So let's keep 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 a hold of that page, and let's go to also 86. Look at the verse similar to that here. Okay, so let's look at verse 14 in Psalm 86. First, I'm going to reread verse uh, verse 6 in 54, and then I'll read 14 in 86. Okay, so first again, verse 6 in 54 in the Hebrew. Chizarim kamo alai baritzim bikshu nafshi v'lo samucha alahim lenegdam salah. And then in 86, verse 14, Elohim zadim kamo alai ba'adas aritzim bikshu nafshi v'lo samucha lenegdam. Okay, so let's look again at the translations. So in 54:6, 54:5, excuse me. For strangers have risen up against me, and oppressors have sought my soul. They have not set God before them, Selah. In 86:14, O God, transgressors have risen up against me. A company of ruthless men have sought my soul, and they have not set you before themselves. Okay, so let's look at the differences between these two verses. What words are different? Okay, so now looking first at God's name, it's Elohim, God's attribute of justice. In both cases, David is appealing to God to act for the sake of justice, but he's changing the description of the enemy. Okay, here in 54, here in 54, Zarim. He calls the enemies Zarim, strangers. Okay, in 86:14, he says transgressors. He calls them transgressors. So what's the difference between strangers and transgressors? Indeed, you would have thought they should be reversed, right? Because it's his cousins who are slandering him in 54. So why is David calling his cousins strangers in 54, and in 86 he calls the enemy there transgressors? First of all, who is the threat in 86? According to Radak, that's the threat of King Saul. So this is like King Saul before Doeg got involved.
The commentary says that 86 refers to Doeg and Achitophel.
Which
Rashi,
commentary?
14 in the blue.
Mm-hmm.
Rashi, Midrash, Shoker Tov.
Right, correct. Okay, so I'm trying to, but that's a very good point. So Rashi in 14, it says it's Doeg and Achitophel, but Radak says it is King Saul.
Interesting.
Okay, so now with Rashi, it's easy. plural transgressors, right? It answers which transgressors.
And the word willfully is in italics. They pursued David willfully in italics.
Mhm.
Is that what you were looking for?
Well, there's more. Also, at the end of the verse 5 and 54, it adds an extra word. Which word does it add? In the Hebrew, Selah.
Yeah,
Selah,
yeah. Prayer,
Selah usually means
contemplation.
forever. Okay,
Yeah.
so now, especially according to Rashi, that's hard to understand. The Zifim only said lashon hara against David. They didn't actually lift a sword against anyone like Doeg. They didn't turn his own son against him like Achitophel. So why is are they considered worse verbally speaking in 54 than in 14, right? Okay, so so I'll explain it first according to Radak, who says it's Shaul, then I'll explain it according to Rashi. So if you say 86, David's asking for justice against King Saul. So then, um, how is he a transgressor if he's mentally ill? Right? So it would be talking about the people working with him. You understand?
Well,
So
it's
maybe this is why Rashi doesn't go according to the Radak. He doesn't like to connect it to King Saul. Transgressor means intentional sinner. Doeg and Achitophel, men of Torah who turned evil, they're an example of a transgressor. They knew what they were doing and they did the evil. So Rashi seems to be a more natural explanation there. You had something you wanted to say before you continue?
well, it says that the Ziphites only threatened his life, but Doeg, Achitophel, and Saul were after his soul.
Right. Which, in other words, the word Selah, which is connected to eternity, should have been in 86, not in 54. You see what I'm saying? You
Yeah.
understand my point here?
Yes, I
Okay,
do.
so why, if they're not as violent as Doeg, if they're not as corrupting as Ahitophel, so why are the Ziphites connected with eternal sin, and Doeg and Achitophel are not? Well, so there's a couple things here. Number one, there's no record that David ever punished the Ziphites. As in direct response to this, if there was later some Ziphites were in different rebellions, and some of them were involved in that, But as far as targeting the people who slandered him, that never happened. Okay, so in other words, this prayer in 54 is the only way David was asking for justice, just that God himself would take care of it. Whereas in the other cases, his enemies had to be eliminated one way or another, whether God would do it or David would do it as the leader of God's army. But to me, the only way to explain it, because we're talking about the nature of their sin, right? So we're talking about the fate of a habitual speaker of slander, a habitual speaker of lashon hara, uh, is cut off from heaven forever. They have not set God before them, Selah, forever. In other words, they established a lifestyle where God never has to be before them. because in an assembly of sinners, of slanderers, God doesn't want anything to do with it. Whereas transgressors, that's a better, without eternal connection to it, is a better way to describe Doeg and Achitophel, because uh, they are, their sin was for that moment. At one time they were Torah scholars, they were into Torah, they were trying to do mitzvahs. Whereas the Ziphites, they kind of already sold their souls. They came up with their own way to live life, where it's okay to slander even your relative. So, in other words, the Ziphites were essentially not even Jewish in their attitude to constantly slander even relatives to the point of risking their lives. Whereas Doeg and Achitophel, they transgressed and it led them to make bad choices, and then they influenced others to do evil. But it was not connected to an eternal choice for evil. Whereas the Ziphites made a choice, their entire lifestyle is around the right to slander anyone they don't like. And they wanted freedom to vote for whoever they preferred. So they preferred to instead of uphold at least the king of Judah and Hebron, uh, that was not on the table for them. They just wanted to promote the kingdom of Saul, even though Samuel the prophet came out and supported David. You understand? So now, of course, this is before King David became the king in Hebron, but the Ziphites, they were not living in that moment where, okay, hopefully soon David will be crowned in Hebron, right? That was not on their agenda. Their agenda was a perpetual lifestyle of slander is okay. If you perhaps if you have a strong enough opinion or something, it's like a weird way to go about a lifestyle, because it's self-destructive. If you slander your friends, they're eventually not going to want to be near you, right? So it's like a self-destructive philosophy the Ziphites had. Okay, but let's also analyze the word zarim, strangers. A zor is used by Judah only in one other place, is when describing someone who is not from the Levitic priests. A zor cannot go into the temple to offer sacrifice. The Levitic priests have to do that for them. So any tribe but the Levitic priests are not priests. So therefore they're called zor in Hebrew in the five books of Moses. Zor, stranger. So in other words, the Ziphites were being strange. They were not being just like if someone from Judah tried to offer a sacrifice instead of a priest, that would be forbidden. So too, the Ziphites were treating David like a stranger. It's not family. Okay. All right. Let's go into some of the commentary in 54. Um, so Mary, can you read the little introduction in 54, this Psalm, page 227?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Let's see. This psalm is David's reaction to the slander of the Ziphites. See Samuel chapters 23, 26. According to one view, they were from the tribe of Judah, thus rendering their portrayal of David worse than that of Doeg, because they were his fellow tribesmen. David was so depressed by their abominable conduct that he employed special musical instruments, see verse 1, to accompany this psalm in order to lift his spirits to a level of prophetic ecstasy.
Okay, let's
Alsich.
I'll check. Yeah. So let's go to the commentary in verse 5. Could you read that?
For the strangers have risen up against me. The Ziphites estranged themselves to David, their relative, by supporting Saul, who was a stranger to them. Mazuktos. And oppressors have sought my soul. This refers to Doeg and Achitophel. Whereas the Ziphites threatened only my body, they assaulted my soul as well. Not only did they challenge me with weapons, but they attacked me with arguments from the Torah, claiming that as a result of my sins, my soul would never merit the world to come. Shazaz Zion.
Okay, so now this is more complicated, right? Why? Because this is before the sin of Uriah and Bathsheba. So with what sin were they accusing David? I think maybe it's referring to the idea that some people thought David was not eligible to be the king because he was descended from Ruth. But the halacha was that the law was that the women of Moab could join Israel, but not the men. So he was a completely legitimate, in his birth and as a Jew, and he was eligible to become the next king. But anyone who held the wrong opinion about that, it would make sense that they would choose to side with King Saul, because then but for that to occur, a person would have to slander King David's circumstance of birth, right? So that's consistent with the Ziphites' concept of being willing to cut him off like a stranger and speak lashon hara.
Was that really necessary? It was not.
No, it's not just not necessary. It's incredibly evil.
It's
Because
acceptable. They shouldn't do that, or Hashem will punish them. Why don't they understand that that there's going to be consequences for their sinful
calm down.
They don't do tshuva. If they don't do tshuva, God's going to cut them off from everything. They're going to cut them off from all worlds and all reward. Why don't they care?
Well, on the good news, we save money on caffeine. Elias Yaakov's quite awake right now.
And
but
he's so angry and irritated that these people are wasting their lives instead of protecting themselves, valuing the lives of themselves and safety of themselves and other innocent people. They're just gonna endanger themselves and other people and go for it to kill and murder and commit suicide for no good reason, or either self-destruct or kill someone. What?
Well, because the very stupid thing, all they had to do was send an emissary to Samuel the prophet and ask him what the halacha was. Samuel was still alive.
Instead, they do something foolish.
Instead, they judge King David from afar in absentia.
And they're also very ungrateful people, idiots.
Well, so so you see all the problems that were going on here, and how this well, if it aggravated Elias Yaakov, it certainly aggravated King David.
It certainly made me agree.
Yeah. Thank God. You see, it's beautiful because Elias Yaakov is at least taking the story seriously. It is historical fact. It's not just a story in a book. So that's a good thing.
But the rest of them, sort back.
Okay, so let's now go to the Blue Book's commentary on verse 9. If you go there, Mary, that's on page 229.
Yes, just a moment, please.
Okay.
Let's
Doesn't
see.
doesn't Hashem feel the same way, Abba?
Well, God took King David's side. Don't worry.
Okay. Verse 9.
Hmm.
For from every distress he has rescued me. God has mercifully saved me from my myriad misfortunes, of which I will always remain unaware. For this too I must render him thanks. And upon my foes my eyes have looked and seen what it desired to see. Radak. Malbim adds that to David the most pleasing part of the miracle was that he was saved from the slanderous reports of the Ziphites without having to battle or spill blood. Thus I saw the enemy, yet did not have to fight them.
Hmm. So now, this is also translated a bit differently in the Targum. The Targum it's in the Mikros Gedolos, but it's also printed in the Judaica press edition as well. Let's go there for a second. On the last verse of Psalm 54. Okay, look on page 202 in the Judaica press, the first word of the Aramaic Targum, nikmasa. That means vengeance. So it's related to that. I saw means that I saw that God avenged me. You understand? So and again, it's just like the Malbim says, it was a miracle. He didn't have to spill blood over that, even though they were selling out David for that he should be killed and his blood should be spilled.
They were not going to get any money for it.
Well, it's not just that, but the fact that David didn't have to kill anyone. Now, there is a very powerful medrash that discusses King David, and the only way I could describe it in modern terminology is King David suffered nightmares on a daily basis, and he had a form of post-traumatic stress disorder. He After he had become the leading general of Saul's army, he had by hand he personally shedded the blood of people over and over again, and it haunted his dreams. So now
That scared him.
well, it's terrifying if all you want to do is talk about the beauty of the creator by when you're composing and quiet, and then you have to get up in the next morning and slaughter people without anesthesia. I mean, it's just you know right. Right. So for a sensitive soul, it was like a nightmare.
It was
So his
it was awful, Abba.
right. So his nightmares were just perhaps reliving some of the anguish he had during the day when he had to slay. But the alternative was if he didn't slay them, they would have gone after innocent civilians. He had no choice.
Why did he have to go through it?
Well, again, God created David to endure certain suffering that most people didn't have to go through. So therefore, he would.
So therefore, his sins would be cleansed and tolerated.
It's less about King David's sins than what he's setting up for as a forefather of the kings of Judah
For Mashiach.
and Mashiach as well, right? So he became just like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. did special spiritual achievements that other people didn't do later on, and they created a spiritual blessing, merit of the forefathers for the Jewish people. So too, King David did for the kings of Judah. Now the question is this: how did Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob do more than Moses, Joshua, and Samuel? The reason is because they were not obligated in 613 commandments. They could focus on the commandments that they had in their generation. Now it says Abraham kept 613 commandments, but for example, if he had a pair of tefillin, it was not written by a scribe under the Sinaitic covenant, so therefore it didn't have holiness. So he put on tefillin, but they were not as holy as your average pair of tefillin nowadays. So therefore, he did everything, but really his focus was on his 8 commandments, the 7 categories of Noach law and the bris milah, circumcision. And then
it's very interesting.
Yes. So he was able to focus just on doing those mitzvahs and doing them with complete faith. So that came first. Now his sons tried to do everything Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did, but in various cases they were unable to do all 613 commandments. He gave the classic example. Joseph most likely did not have side locks. The Egyptian culture wouldn't allow him to sit on the viceroy's throne without having shaved the sideburns. So therefore, it's a verse in Leviticus. So he couldn't fulfill that. So that's an example where the sons of Jacob were not on the same level as the forefathers. They were not able to pursue all of the 613 commandments, but they did a pretty good job. Let's put it that way. But with King David, he was still commanded in the 613 mitzvahs. So the question is this: how do you make someone have the merit of the forefathers when he still has all the commandments and he's too busy to do the commandments, to not do the commandments, right? You understand? Like I get the classic example that right before Shabbos begins, if a Jew and a Ben Noach are fighting missionaries, the Jew has to go offline and keep Shabbos. The Ben Noach can still do the mitzvah in front of him, but the Jew has to stop.
By going offline, he's keeping Shabbos.
Right, so the Jew keeps Shabbos. That's the most important spiritual thing for him. The Ben Noach still fights the heresy. That's the most spiritually important thing for him. So in other words,
It's not important for Hashem.
No,
it's not important for Hashem that people fight for heresy.
Wait. So,
that's unacceptable.
No, so now let me give you a parable. So now, if fighting the heresy is a parable for the capacity of the forefathers to focus on mitzvahs more than a regular Jew could, right? Whereas King David, he had to interrupt the mitzvah and go do his obligations, right, as a Jew. So therefore, what did God do to make a person who cannot give as much time to the mitzvahs as the forefathers could, right? So he gave him troubles. So that's why King David has so many troubles. So he was able to serve God with a good attitude. And it's considered as if he had reached the level of the forefathers. And in the Haftarah, in synagogue, we say Magen David, the shield of David, just like we say Magen Abraham in the Amida Shemona Esrei prayer. So King David is compared to Abraham, but it's a different category of merit.
Why is he still compared to Abraham, even though he failed the test?
Right. So King David did not pass a test with Uriah and Bathsheba. So therefore, he's not considered equal to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But I have heard an interpretation that says that Mashiach will be able to achieve that level. So at least
Is it definitely possible?
so it's possible. In other words, if the opinion holds Mashiach will do it, so it means at least it's possible someone can do it. But I would have thought before heard that I would have thought it's impossible because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob could be specialists. Had a similar din to a Ger Toshav. They could just focus on their mitzvah. But we see if so. In other words, this explains why Jeremiah calls calls Mashiach David. He's a carbon copy of King David because he'll be able to do it. But just in this one area, he'll be able to achieve what his forefather David couldn't do, and thereby he'll be on the level of the forefathers. So that'll be awesome.
If one of his descendants and sons and members of his family tree pass the test which he could not succeed, will they be will they will they be put in the prayers of Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, and considered to be like Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov in the Shemona Esrei?
Well, whatever happens, God will do it with justice and mercy. We'll find out.
Like David could not.
Well, yeah. Again, David did so much. In other ways, he did things that the forefathers didn't do. Right.
Right.
So there's a medrash that describes that in the when it's time to do the benching, to lead the grace after meals, in the future, great feast when after the resurrection. So each of the forefathers will not be the leader of the benching because, for example, um, Abraham will be told, no, you had Yishmael, so therefore you shouldn't leave the blessing, because Yishmael caused so much death in the world. And then Isaac will say, no, but you had Esav, he can't leave the blessing. So different reason for each of the great righteous people in history. But then when it comes to King David, it says he says that I will lead the benching. So King David, for the sake of blessing God, and of course, look how God blessed him to be the writer
He
of
also
Psalms.
had a few evil sons,
Well,
but he was still allowed
stay
but he was still allowed to lead the blessing. I'm just asking.
We'll answer. That's a very good question. We'll answer that in a minute. So King David, God blessed him to be the author of Psalms, and therefore he's the perfect one to lead bench and grace after meals, in the time when everyone sits down to eat. I assume from either the Shor Habor or the Leviathan, the Leviathan, as per those midrash. Okay, so now great question. Elias Yaakov asked. He said King David also
had evil sons, and yet he's still allowed to lead the benching too.
Very good question. So
why is that?
Right. So what's the difference between King David and Avshalom and Isaac and Esav? Right.
Right.
So throughout Isaac's life, Esav lived in peace and happiness, besides his anger at Jacob. Right.
But when Isaac died, his death, his life ended in the violent manner. One of
you're talking. No, Isaac died in peace. But
I'm saying Esav's life.
No, wait, let me give the answer, and then you could you just understand. Whereas someone, for example, Absalom, he died violently. he died violently before King David. You understand?
Yeah, but Asav's death was also terrible. It was also it was also
No,
so
no, but it was.
it was
Wait,
also
let me.
shocking
Okay,
because
wait, don't defend it. Let me explain why it can't.
I'm
It's
trying to say it. What I'm trying to say is Asap's death was also shocking because his head was beheaded by one of Yaakov's great
but
grandsons.
that's not what we're talking about though.
Yeah, I mean,
We're talking about why is King David not limited by the evil of his son, whereas Isaac is limited by the evil of his son. Because King David buried his evil sons. Or he had Solomon bury in the case of one of them. So in King David's case, he demanded justice against his own son, even against his own son. Now he didn't want Absalom to die in that way. So, but King David demanded justice against his own children. Isaac did not demand justice against Esau. You see the difference? Instead, Isaac blessed Esau with Mount Seir, right? So it's to give him Isaac empowered Esau, in other words, whereas it was David oversaw the destruction of those sons that turned away from God. Whether or not he wanted them to die the way they died, he stood up for justice, God's justice, even at the expense of a familial tie. Understood? Everyone understand that?
yeah. But around the time of Yaakov's death, when Asa tried to take the Machapella for himself instead of allowing Yaakov to take it, he was beheaded by one of Yaakov's grandchildren, and in some ways his death is somewhat as terrifying as that of Avshalom.
Yeah, violent people often meet the violent fates, but it's actually a machlokus among the midrashim, a disagreement among the midrashim. According to one, it was Hushim ben Dan, grandson of Jacob, who slew Esav, and according to one midrash, it was Judah, son of Jacob.
That's why I saw in the midrash Hutim killed
Hushim.
Hushim killed him.
That is in the family midrash says right, but there's another midrash that says Judah did it. So and I explained my opinion was that Hushim hit him, but Judah finished him off. So why is that? Because there were actually four people in that generation with exceptional strength: Esav, Jacob, Judah, and Manasseh. So the others were regularly strong people, but those four had like world-class strength. So therefore, it makes sense that a champion falls by a champion, right? The finishing blow was probably by either Judah or Manasseh. However, Manasseh was the viceroy in Egypt while Joseph came to bury Jacob. So therefore, Judah was the only one remaining of the four exceptionally strong people in that generation at the time Asa was killed. So therefore, Judah probably did the finishing blow. However, Hushim probably did the first blow. Why is that? Because Hushim was deaf. He did not hear all the stories of the dangers and the fears that Esau caused to Jacob and his brothers and his sons, the brothers of Dan. So therefore, Hushim was not. He didn't have the reputation of Esau holding him back. Whereas all the other sons of Jacob, they heard that Jacob was in fear of Esau when he was running from them, and the children were little. So therefore, a fear of Esau was taught in the house of Jacob, but Hushim, being deaf, never really absorbed that. so he was psychologically free to attack Esav. However, there's no indication that midrashically that he had the strength to actually do battle with Esav. Whereas midrashically, Judah is described as having that strength. That's why my personal opinion is a combining of the two midrashim in the sense of the Elu Elu Dibur Lakim Chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. To say that Hushim was the one who first struck Esav, and Judah was the one who finished him off. Okay. Any questions? Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Um,
On Psalms?
did Yaakov have immense strength, even when
Yeah.
he was old?
Yeah, Yaakov had immense strength. However, okay, we'll discuss it further other time. Okay, right now we're trying to focus
My
on
other question you can at least answer.
which question was that?
How will Mashiach's coming affect the world even after David succeeded, even when he was experiencing hardships? How will Mashiach succeed more than David did because of the hardships his forefather, his ancestor experienced?
No, it just David went through the difficulty for his descendants. They don't have to suffer the same fate of having so many people betray them, etc. But there is an opinion that Mashiach will have a lot of people who are angry at him coming. So he'll have to deal with some of the stuff King David had to go through. But most of the innovation of suffering at the hands of doubters was already done by King David, so that I don't think Mashiach will have to suffer at the same level that King David went through. Well, I certainly hope not. There's been so much suffering in the world already. It's okay if the first day Mashiach comes, there's a resurrection of the dead, rebuilding the temple, and under $1 gasoline. So it's okay if we have all those things on the same day. Very good. Okay. Any questions? Okay, remember to unmute your mic if you want to ask a question or comment or even to laugh. Okay.
Don't laugh at my father's
No, they laugh. It's a joke, not at miscue. Okay.
scary puns.
Okay. All right. So let's I think at this point it's already a good idea to not start 55 because it's relatively long. All right. Anyone? Any questions off the floor? Any questions?
My question is, how will it go?
How will what go?
The thing without
Mashiach time?
starting. Yeah, and Mashiach time.
Oh, stay tuned and find out.
That Dragon Ball Z reference again.
No, that's actually precedes that show. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So even though not everyone knew that Samuel had anointed David, people knew that Samuel had publicly ridiculed Saul and said Saul was on the way out. Do you understand? So we could judge the Ziphites favorably that they didn't know David was the anointed, but we cannot judge them favorably that they were not investing the betrayal of their cousin for the sake of a king who was already on the way to being deposed. You understand? It didn't even make sense. There was very limited political capital they could do for supporting a king who was already about to lose office. You understand? So as horrible it is when people sell out for a benefit, it's even worse when people sell out for no benefit. So that's the problem with the Ziphites. That's why you understand? So their sin, that's why there's an eternal aspect mentioned by their sin, unlike the sins of the ones King David prayed against in Psalm 86. Any questions? Any questions?
I have a question.
One more question. Okay, go ahead.
Was it really necessary for uh for uh for King David to go through all of that, everything that Hashem put him in, so that he would be able to to be saved, sin free, and be and live forever in the next world and be rewarded immensely for eternity, while his wicked enemies suffer for all the evil deeds they did against him and Ben Israel during their lifetime.
Well, it it's very interesting. The level of, if I could just mention one more aspect about the Ziphite sin.
Yeah.
The last paragraph on the second verse in the white edition. Linda, could you go there?
Yes, sir.
Page 684. The last paragraph on the commentary in verse 2. He explains.
684. 681. Pages are sticking. Sorry. Give me a second, please.
No problem. 100, 100,
1 684. I'm
Yes.
684. And by your might, is that the one?
He explains. The last paragraph on verse 2.
Oh, on verse 2. He explains that the Ziphites were in fact saying to Saul, "We tricked David by pretending that we too are your enemies. We purported to hide from you so that David would feel secure among us."
So imagine not only betraying a cousin, but tricking him to make sure that he feels he could just hang out long enough for the king's army to come get him. So that's the nature of it. So the it wasn't just go attack him, right? That's more straightforward. It's a sneaky, conniving, treacherous against a cousin.
That's disgusting.
Right. So you see, this explains why King David seems to show even more vehemence toward the Ziphites than, but he doesn't call them transgressors. He calls them strangers because it's just like Judah and Benjamin should not be offering in the temple, right?
Because he hates what they
So-
did to him, and he's genuinely very worried about them
So
when
what?
they commit a sin.
So in other words, the Ziphites don't belong among the Jewish people.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way of the Jews.
Yeah, I'm saying.
What do they?
He was
What's the
genuinely
term?
upset when they committed such a terrible avera to end their lives for no good reason other than vengeance for the king, because
They were not. They're trying to end King David's life.
saying it's not worth it ending your life over speaking lashon hara. It's stupid. That's what King David was upset
Right,
with him
but
for.
they didn't even calculate that they were hurting themselves. All they wanted to do was get rid of David.
Yeah,
So
that's why he was upset with them.
so in other words, that Sela could also be translated in the reverse. Without eternity. In other words, they have no hope of heaven because they think they're right, and they don't have to engage in violence. They having other people do the violence, so they never have to feel guilt. Whereas somebody who is straightforward that they want to attack someone, they had to at least at some level confront the idea that they have to justify what they're doing. You understand? So as crazy as it sounds, but maybe it's not so crazy. Someone who is a sneaky, no good Nick who tries to manipulate others to kill people is in a sense worse than a person who at least has a warrior's attitude that it's his responsibility to take the battle to the enemy, right? So there's there's at least an aspect kind of good in a warrior, even if they're on the wrong side, because they're trying to just pursue things according to the quote unquote the art of war, to pursue whatever goals of their king is, right? So in some level, somewhere in there is an aspect of nobility. Whereas somebody who's just a no good snake in the grass, trying to manipulate the law to kill the innocent, so they're a bigger drain on society than the overly violent mercenary. You understand? Linda, you were just saying something before, right? What was it?
Well, it's something that I saw. I could be wrong. So it's more not so much a statement as it seems that David suffered every type of betrayal a human being could suffer.
Yeah.
And he still supremely chose the kindness and mercy of Hashem to everyone, despite all of that. He did not become bitter. He didn't become hateful, resentful. He did become sad, but he used and made special instruments to help him get over it. He
Right,
is the
just
profound example for all humanity.
King David's idea of making a list and taking names. How do I construct this harp or this musical instrument? Not who do I have to take revenge on once I get into my own throne? You understand? It's just amazing. I don't know if I could have passed that test.
You wouldn't have been able to pass the test.
I would have just said, okay, let's see. Who do we got to get rid of once I'm in power? Okay, Ziphites near the top of the list there. You don't want those snakes in the grass there. You know what I'm saying?
Crazy.
So it's really, I'm impressed with King David's capacity. His idea was, let's bring in some more musical instruments, not let's make a list of people we got to get rid of. Yeah, it's just amazing. You know what I'm saying?
Don't make a list of people you want to kill.
No, because King David was God's anointed. Samuel and David knew David was the true king at that point. Right? So
Right.
if I was in his shoes, I'm not sure I could have passed that test. It's
It was a mercy he didn't have to suffer any more than he already did.
Yes, but also, I mean, just look at the level of mercy. Someone who, King David, he loved the Torah more than how many people in history ever loved the Torah like King David?
And he understood what true forgiveness was, not just at the soul level, but at the deepest soul level.
Right. So now, if you compare the David as a paragon of someone with great emotions, but Torah way of life and values came first, So just compare him to the fictional idea of Santa Claus, right? Oh, you're on the naughty list this year. You forgot to return your library book on time. Naughty, naughty. Remember that toy you wanted? Off the list. So that's Santa's mercy. right? Look at King David. These guys
Let's
plotting to
let's
kill their
let's
cousins.
let's invent new musical instruments to so that I'm not upset about this whole thing.
Yes, and in other words, also, if I'm thinking about it from God's perspective, I'm not going to have to take revenge. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. If someone's willing to be humble and let God decide if there should be vengeance, and if there is vengeance is the Lord's, why should I take revenge? That's King David's attitude. But again, just think about this secular idea of Santa Claus, right? You forgot to return the library book on time. No bicycle for you this year. Right?
That's not mercy.
Exactly. But you see what I'm saying? Right? And anyone want to comment on that?
That's heresy.
Right, but you see the value of clinging to God's Torah in the correct way. Then mercy and justice are upon us in beautiful ways. Right? You see, King David didn't have to make a list of people he had to get rid of because he trusted in God's sense of justice. He
He shouldn't have
trusted,
even made a list of people to kill.
he didn't make a list of people to
He
kill.
did not. But I'm just saying, he shouldn't. Someone shouldn't make that mistake of making a list of people to kill.
Right, but remember, the verse says that when Samuel came to Jesse's home, that he saw that King David was ruddy. So the midrashically, Samuel had concern that ruddy, in other words, not just that he was redheaded, but that blood was going to be spilt by him. You understand? Now it turns out blood was going to be spilt by him because he was one of the greatest warriors in history. But Samuel had the impression that King David was going to shed blood, not that he was judging him. He was having a prophetic like augury. Just look at him that he's going to be a person who has to shed blood.
But did not David rectify the ruddy complexion?
Yeah, I mean,
His
David is just
his his
off the charts.
attitude towards life was a tikkun for the curse of the ruddy complexion.
Yeah, it's just King
It's
David.
just amazing. He's just amazing.
Yes, yes. Like he in a more like Moses is kind of like an angel and a human together. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And King David is like a human and a human together, still acting angelic 99.9999999% of the time. So King David is extremely emotional, and he's still like very similar to Moses. You know what I'm saying? It's just really amazing. Just my goodness. So that's why it's so important to defend King David if somebody wants to slander him. Remember, there's a Talmudic statement about whoever thinks King David sinned doesn't know what they're talking about. At a technical level, he didn't sin.
I never thought of that. I
Yeah.
didn't even think that he said. I didn't even have
Okay,
to
calm
think
down. As we studied in chapter 51, he said to God, to you alone did I sin. So he only sinned from God's ideal perspective,
it would be
not from the
disgusting if people did
not
think
from the
I was
not from
thinking
the
that
actual right. No,
he sinned.
not from the actual legal perspective.
Think of trying that. I never even said it.
No, it's not whether any individual thought it. It's just that King David deserves better. He was able to do things a lot of people only dream about, but how many people could actually do what he did have under such tests? It's just amazing. And again, here with the Ziphites, I think it's just off the charts that he's able to think about. God will take care of the vengeance. I just have to focus on praying to God, and I have to do it with joy. So let's bring in more instruments. It's just when the most fundamental emotional states in human existence occur, and someone acts like King David acted, it's just the result is superhuman effort. You understand? But he was not like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, he went 40 days and 40 nights without food. He was built like kind of half superhuman almost. But King David was completely human, and he's making these kind of choices and philosophically clinging with all his might to these ideals, and just fascinating and amazing. Really amazing. Any comments, questions? All right, we're about to pause for tonight. Last call for comments or questions, and otherwise, all right, let's pause for tonight. Thanks for learning chapter 54 with me. Oh,